he seems like a pretty potent combination of a really pretty big frame, which makes him difficult to block, but also a good bit of raw speed too. I think that there's a chance that, he is certainly going to end up being a much better player than the amount of attention that he's gotten coming into Georgia probably would suggest. I do think diamond in the rough, kind of hiding in plain sight. I think there's a chance Arian Smith is that. He's been one of the signees that I've been the most excited about, especially relative to the overall attention that he's gotten, Joe. I think you may be onto something there. Jay Shipe says recruits want to see there this year who's going to be Georgia's quarterback next year when Stetson Bennett is gone. Playing Stetson against cupcakes isn't helping UGA. I know that's kind of a hot topic. A lot of folks kind of feel that way. The one thing I'm pretty sure Georgia's not going to do is Georgia's not going to use this season as a proving ground or a training opportunity for next season. Just Georgia's not going to do that. That in the sort of rigorous schedule that Georgia, like any other SEC team, is going to face, that Georgia's thinking about week to week. What do we need to do to win this week's game? What do we need to do to be ready for next week's game? Georgia's not going to turn, so-and-so game into a glorified G-Day. They're just not going to do that. And some people wish they would. Maybe there's examples somewhere of big-time programs that do that. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find examples of that. Most coaches think about the season that they're in, because if they don't, they may find out that somebody else is coaching that future season they were themselves worried about. Brian Jones says that Scherzer was just too dominant last night. Yeah, I think you have to give him a lot of credit. I do. Now, it certainly hurt Atlanta last night to sort of, give up the sort of give back run after the Riley home run that cut into the lead, to then see, New York come back and get into the Braves bullpen and get its own home run to kind of extend that lead back. That was a little bit of a backbreaker there, but ultimately the story of the night was how dominant Scherzer was, and the fact that, very unusually, very, not customary, certainly, Max Fried did not have a great night last night. Tiffany Art says 2022 recruits going to be at the varsity signing autographs this weekend, one perk to NIL. I agree with Tiffany on that. There are a lot of things with the current, sort of new NIL era that I'm not sure I love. But one of the things I do like is it does create more opportunities for fans to connect with players in a way that just wouldn't be possible in the past. We talked about this before, that, as a kid, going to picture day and hanging out with Georgia players and getting autographs and, having a chance to not just pose for a picture with them, but actually speak to them for a few minutes. That was something that I really enjoyed doing, and the program's so popular now, it's just sort of hard to do that. But these NIL autograph signing opportunities create a little bit more access for fan with player, and we think that's a really good thing. And I think Tiffany's right about that. Good morning, by the way, to all of our video platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We'll get ready to start the show here coming up in just a moment. But I want to take a couple more comments before we get there, if you don't mind. Greg Baker says, speaking of edge rushers, whatever happened to Adam Anderson? Yeah, I don't have any new information on Anderson. My understanding is he's still awaiting trial, but I don't have any new information beyond that. Stephen Gulf Shore says, looking forward to another version of this year's Junkyard Dog. Steve, I'm right there with you on that. I think that should be a lot of fun. John Leggett said back in the 2020 class, Georgia picked up M.J. Sherman over Will Anderson. Have not heard much about him. Yeah, that's one of those things will always kind of be a part of the Sherman story. He was the outside linebacker Georgia brought in, and at the time was very happy to have him. Will Anderson, who was an in-state star, goes on to obviously big things thus far at Alabama. But I would say the Sherman story's far from done. I would say that M.J. Sherman's one of those guys in kind of a reserve role that you could see have a chance to do something for UGA this year. Now, it's about time for that to happen. I don't dispute that necessarily. But I would say that there is still a chance that we hear from Sherman in a big way. Is it going to be as good as Will Anderson's turned out to be? That's probably a bit of a long shot. But can he still be a big-time contributor for UGA? I would certainly say the chances of that are probably pretty good. So a lot to get with you today. We will talk a little bit about Georgia getting a 2025 running back commit. We'll do a little bit of that, and we'll discuss a bit about what the world might look like when Jabri Wallace-Coleman actually arrives on campus there at UGA, and assuming he does maintain that commitment all the way to the signing day for the class of 2025. But off the top of the show, we think around here that Georgia's actually probably a little undervalued when it comes to potentially winning a national championship. And we think that there are a couple of players mentioned by another media outlet here that could play a pivotal role in getting all that done. What do you say we start with that? Connor Raleigh stops by. We'll give you more details on the DawgNation.com tailgate. All of that, too. There's some interesting recruiting news to get to. We'll cover all of that ground on what is going to be a busy show as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, it's getting about that time. The 2022 season is on the horizon, and we continue to believe here that Georgia, in terms of what its actual chances are of repeating as national champions, is probably better than the current conversation would suggest. Like when you see a lot of the analytic stuff or when you see the official polls when they come out, you're pretty much going to see a certain consistent line of thought as it relates to Georgia. Georgia's going to be very commonly mentioned as, like, say, the number 3 team in the country. They may actually be number 3 in both the AP and the coaches poll when they come out, behind Alabama, behind Ohio State. And that's pretty much where a lot of like the analytics power ratings have sort of shown, and some of the sort of unofficial preseason stuff, in some cases way too early top 25s that have been out, that Georgia's very commonly slotted behind, you know, an Ohio State and an Alabama, and pretty much ahead of everybody else. And who knows? That may be exactly where Georgia finishes for this upcoming season. They may be, hey, still a kind of a playoff team, but slightly behind Alabama, slightly behind Ohio State, which may, you know, be the overwhelming best team in the Big Ten. That Georgia may just be kind of slotted right there behind that. But we believe there's actually a pretty good chance that does not take place, that Georgia, you know, even though people see, well, oh my gosh, look at all that Georgia lost off last year's team, 15 draft picks, 5 first-rounders off the defense alone, that even with the attrition that Georgia's had year over year from the program, that Georgia, based on a number of factors, actually set up pretty well for the upcoming season. So I was thinking about this a little bit last night, this morning, getting ready for today's show. Let's say that turns out to be true. I think there are a couple of names that could go a long way towards ensuring that as a real possibility. Now, don't misunderstand me here. The 2 names I'm about to give you, I'm not saying they have to have a great year for Georgia to have a championship type season. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if these 2 guys do have a great season, then all of a sudden the notion that Georgia is still very much in the thick of things, very much likely to repeat as national champion, possible to repeat as national champions, these 2 guys could turn out to be really big swing players in terms of getting that done. And it just so happens the reason why these 2 players are on my mind is because the outlet known as Pro Football Focus, some of you know what that is, some of you like it, some of you don't. Kirby Smart's kind of taken PFF to task in the past. But Pro Football Focus recently put out a list of 30 guys for the upcoming season that it thinks can be breakout players for the upcoming year. And look, the 2 names that get mentioned by George, I'm going to give them to you both now. We're going to talk more about them individually. Arian Smith at wide receiver and Dumas-Johnson at linebacker. Now, if I were projecting my own breakout players for Georgia, I have to admit, I don't know that Smith nor JDJ, or as they call him, Pop, I don't know that either of these 2 guys would kind of necessarily be my most obvious, most likely breakout players. Dumas-Johnson might come somewhat close to being that on defense. On offense, a guy like Arian Smith, for a number of reasons, even though I think that Smith has huge high upside and tremendous potential, I'd probably lean more in the direction of an Eric Gilbert. I'd probably look more at the idea of wide receivers who I think right now are probably standing to be on the field a little bit more. You know, guys like Adonai Mitchell and Lau McConkey, who established themselves last year. Guys like Dominic Blaylock and Kyrus Jackson, who are seemingly more fully recovered from injuries that kind of kept them out of the wide receiver rotation a good bit last season. That's not a knock on Arian Smith, but if I'm thinking about Smith as a breakout player, I think about huge potential there. I think about, you know, certainly one of the more fun guys to watch, that if he could have the big moment, it kind of changes everything for UGA. But in terms of how I define breakout potential, I don't necessarily know that Arian Smith would be my top guy there on that. And that's not, like I said, it's not like a knock because he's been injured or anything else. It's just because you're talking about kind of a crowded wide receiver situation for UGA, and it seems like right now there are some who are probably slotted ahead of Arian Smith in that pecking order for themselves to hopefully be the breakout guy. But nonetheless, you know, let me give you what Pro Football Focus says, their reasoning for putting Smith as a part of this discussion. I'll show you the quote here on the screen. I'll read a little bit of that to you. So this is Anthony Treesh writing for Pro Football Focus. Arian Smith is a legitimate track star. In addition to his football duties, he's also a member of the Bulldogs track and field squad who earned first-team All-American honors in the 4x100-meter relay and clocked a wind-aided 10.10-second 100-meter dash last year. That speed's made him a big play threat in his short Georgia career. Despite running only 16 routes over the past couple of seasons, the 6-foot, 185-pound receivers hauled in 4 deep receptions for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns. Injuries have hindered his development, but he can become one of the most dangerous pass catchers in the country with a clean bill of health. So that's a lot there from Treesh on Arian Smith, maybe most prominently the notion that it's that clean bill of health that he needs. One of the things that slowed Arian Smith down, and it's not easy to slow him down because of how fast he is, but one of the things that has slowed down Arian Smith's college career is he has spent a good bit of that time being injured. That's just a fact. Anthony Treesh wrote about that there. But the other thing the PFF guy correctly notes is when he has been on the field, one of the things that Smith has proven to be is the kind of home run hitter that makes him incredibly dangerous. And I told you last year, I thought late in the season, this is prior to Smith, dealing with another injury that kind of took him out of the story for the Dogs the rest of the year. I had this sort of like fans' intuition that maybe Smith was going to step up and make one of the big plays for Georgia down the stretch last year because of the home run threat that he has. Turns out the injury situation just kind of prevented that from being the case. But we've all seen this with our own eyes, that in short bursts and these sort of rare moments, that when he swings for the fences, you have a chance to see a good bit of fireworks from a guy like Arian Smith. So it kind of brings me back to the point I was making a moment ago, that if you truly ask me to identify a breakout player for Georgia offensively, I'd probably mention a few names before I got to Arian Smith. That's not disrespect to Smith. It's really more out of respect I have for other Georgia players who I think could be ready to take the next step for their career. But if you told me, let's say you had a chance to visit the future and you saw the 2022 season, you came back to relay to me what you saw. If you told me that we'd see more longer stretches, full seasons worth of what we have seen from Arian Smith in a short burst, I would tell you, my gosh, that might be one of the things that gives a springboard to the Georgia offense that makes it even better than we kind of think it can be, and we think it can be pretty good. That if you gave me kind of a magic wand and I could give a breakout season, any Georgia player, just given his overall profile as a player because of the speed that he brings to the table, if that be the case, I might select Arian Smith to be that dude. I think that Pro Football Focus might be slightly too optimistic here in suggesting that Arian Smith's that guy, but if you told me I could make him that guy, that might be the kind of springboard player that would propel Georgia to even more success than we think is kind of on the table. Now, it's interesting. If you want to go back to spring practice here for a moment, Smith talked about some of this kind of stuff. He met with reporters and he, kind of ran the gamut of everything that Treesh just wrote about. His time running track, his injury situation, trying to come back from that, taking it a little bit slow this spring in doing so, and the notion that eventually he wants to be the kind of player that an outlet like Pro Football Focus or a show like this suggests that he could be. This is not a real long clip necessarily, but in this relatively short clip, Arian Smith acknowledges that at some point in time, it's kind of time for him to go out there and put all this together on the field and actually live into the potential that we would all say that he has. This was Arian Smith back during spring practice.
I feel like I'm that guy, but you can say what you can say, but it's really, I just want to show it. I'm really big talk guy, so actions speak louder than words.
Actions speak louder than words, he says. We're hearing all these words around him from Pro Football Focus. We've mentioned him certainly plenty of times here on this show. And now he says it's time for me to go out there and show what I'm all about there in this regard. And one of the reasons why so many fans, like I said before, would be rooting for him to do that, would maybe be wishing that sort of breakout level season for him, is because he does bring, a lot of what Georgia hasn't necessarily had enough of, and that's that true straight line, blazing speed, running past defensive backs. If you told me you could get a full season's worth of help from him, if you told me that he would be one of those guys that takes his game to the next level because of what his game has the potential to be, That would be actually really, really exciting. He's a swing player that could make Georgia even more of a national championship contender. Now let's talk about another one of those guys on defense here for a moment. That's Dumas-Johnson. Now, JDJ, because of the position he plays, because of what I saw from him a year ago, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of label him as a potential breakout guy. I would probably still select somebody else on defense before I got to Dumas-Johnson, especially if you think about what the definition of breakout is on the Georgia defense. Like last year, Trayvon Walker broke out and became the number 1 overall pick. Devontae Wyatt kind of broke out, became a first-round pick. Lewis Seen, I don't know that he had a true breakout, but he certainly took his game to the next level. He himself also became a first-round pick. Like the definition of what breakout is on the Georgia defense is actually pretty robust. It's the kind of thing that results in you being a first-round pick. Now, Dumas-Johnson's not draft eligible after this upcoming season, but it just gives you an idea of what breakout has kind of meant for the Georgia defense overall. But as the guy they call Pop, there is certainly some excitement about what he has a chance to do for Georgia this season. I want to get into what the Georgia folks have been saying about Dumas-Johnson here in a moment, but let me give you a Pro Football Focus on this first. Once again, Anthony Treesh on why they think, I like the headline here, our producer Michael Carvell, props for Pops. I like that. But this is why they think Jamon Dumas-Johnson can be that breakout guy. He says that Georgia had one of the best linebacking core in college football that's seen in 2021, but it saw its top 3 guys at that position all come off the board within the first 100 picks of the 2022 NFL Draft. The good news is that there is still plenty of promise at the position for the Dogs, including true sophomore Jamon Dumas-Johnson, also known as Pop, there in Athens. Dumas-Johnson only played 103 snaps as a freshman in 2021, most of which came in garbage time, but he shined in that small sample, earning an 81 PFF grade with 12 defensive stops and 1 pick six and 1 pass breakup. Additionally, Dumas-Johnson did this despite not playing football the year before as a high school senior due to the pandemic up there in Maryland. So that's Anthony Treesh laying out what could be in store for Jamon Dumas-Johnson here this year. And there are echoes of this kind of praise coming from UGA there as well. In fact, one of the things that Georgia coach Kirby Smart has noticed about Jamon Dumas-Johnson is not just the athleticism that allowed him to kind of look good in kind of a sort of a limited role last season, but also thus far this spring with a lot of big names and big voices no longer on that Georgia defense, that a guy like Johnson is actually also emerging as a real vocal leader there as well. During the spring, Smart gave him and other players praise for that very thing. This is Kirby back in the spring there on that.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of guys stepping up. I think Pop's doing a great job stepping up. Cedric Van Pran, Warren Erickson are guys that continue to lead up front. I think Roger's tried to take on a little bit greater role. Kieris continues to do that. Nolan has been tremendous at being vocal when things aren't going right. Keeley has done a good job of that. So there's a lot of guys. You can just see them trying to assert themselves and encourage more than discourage.
So, I mean, that's a long list of pretty distinguished players that Kirby mentioned as vocal leaders for this team. The fact that he mentioned Pop first on that list has to certainly mean something. The fact that he's included in that company, we know that means something. That's pretty good praise there for Jamon Dumas-Johnson. Beyond that, I thought Kendall Milton, who's a great running back on this Georgia team and doing battle against these linebackers every day during practice, I also thought he had some pretty interesting praise of Jamon Dumas-Johnson going back to the spring there as well, saying that in addition to the leadership stuff that Smart says he's seen, just the sheer athleticism, that sheer ability to go out there and make plays, Kendall Milton says that's something that he's seen firsthand. So the idea of a breakout, player for Georgia, certainly that's something that Milton would say is a possibility. This is Kendall from spring.
I think Pop is going to be special. I see a lot of resemblances with Quay in his game. When you go out there, run routes against him, we do the drills where we have to kind of juke him out. He's just patient. He just lets everything come to him. He's smart with the game, and he's a super physical player. And I feel like those are all tools that kind of make a good linebacker in the long run. And I feel like Pop, he's going to be another one of those guys that steps up on the defense and becomes a leader on the team.
So that's really interesting from Kendall Milton, and certainly it's very articulate praise from Milton about what he thinks that Pop has a chance to be there for Georgia. But here's where I have to sort of slam the brakes at least a little bit. I'm not trying to be a wet blanket. I'm just trying to be honest here for a moment. Is that if you look at the high-end projection for what JDJ could be, or as they call him, Pop, you're thinking Roquan Smith, you're thinking Nakobe Dean. But here's the thing you got to mention, though, when it comes to Roquan and Dean, is that in their second year at Georgia, neither guy was nearly as effective as he would become in his third year. That Roquan was a good player in 2016, but he became a great player in his third year in 2017. Nakobe Dean was a pretty good player for Georgia in 2020, and I actually had forgotten he was a semifinalist for the Butkus Award there that year. But you're also talking about a pandemic year and kind of a weird situation overall. He became a much better player for Georgia in 2021. His interception numbers go up. His tackle for loss numbers go way up. He was way more of a statistical factor in 2021 than he had been in 2020. So even if you're saying, hey, Jamon Dumas-Johnson's the next Roquan Smith, he's the next Nakobe Dean, even if you're going to give that level of praise to him, you have to acknowledge that he's only going into his second season. So even if he's traveling the same path that Roquan or Nakobe eventually traveled for Georgia, you're talking about a player this year that's maybe likely a very solid starter for Georgia, but not necessarily the superstar yet that Nakobe and Roquan became while playing in this Georgia defense. Unless that's not true. And unless he does chart a slightly different path, and maybe he plays better as a second-year guy than either of those guys did. Once again, that kind of makes him that sort of swing player that could propel Georgia to even greater chances of championship success. So the ultimate bottom line for me is that I think that Pro Football Focus is probably being a little maybe too aggressive in labeling Arian Smith and Jamon Dumas-Johnson as true breakout players, especially in comparison to some of the other names in this list, other programs, guys who I do think probably are really about to break out maybe at the very highest level. But if I end up being wrong on this, if I end up underestimating what I'm expecting from both these guys, and they do sort of match the label that PFF gives them here, then the rest of the country better buckle up. A Georgia team that already starts the season as a short-list contender for the national championship could have an even better chance of bringing that trophy back to Athens once again in 2022. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Good morning to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, we start at 9:45, DawgNation.com, and the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We do our first and 15. We roll into the regular show after that. We're available on podcast, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of podcast platforms. Posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com, of course. And we're on the radio at noon every day in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. So we're just happy to have you checking in with us no matter how you get to us today. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. Boy, we've had some big-time heavy rain last few days a little bit, especially, where I am, maybe where you are there too. And that heavy rain can be a reminder that our folks at ESOG can do good work for you if you see that rainwater creeping in where it's not supposed to be. Wet spots showing up, basement garage, crawl spaces, that sort of sign of water intrusion. That's the kind of issue that you need to get seen about, the same way that many of you see those cracks showing up in the walls there too. Those cracks send off kind of an alarm inside of you of, oh gosh, foundation issue maybe. And that's the kind of thing you just got to be really careful about. And obviously, Engineered Solutions of Georgia can help you take care of all of that. That's what they do. They got an entire team of engineers on their staff. Nobody else in this industry can say that here in our local area, doing that kind of work for you, making sure they're taking care of you when it comes to foundation waterproofing issues, really solving that problem for you. They are a solutions-based company. That's what they are all about. They're also proud partners of UGA. Been doing that for a long time. Good friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily. Been a solutions-oriented company for more than 15 years. They just know how to do good work for you. So it's fun to support those that support UGA. We're certainly grateful for your support of those that support us. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, a great example of that. They're also easy to get in touch with. So you can simply give them a call. Dial 678-ESOG now. That's right, dial 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, before we do Around the Doghouse and before we bring on Connor Riley for a Kroger Fresh Take, let me give you a quick update on DawgNation Duck Hunt. As you hear me say this, our season opening kickoff there at the Home Depot backyard right next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium before Georgia takes on Oregon on September 3rd is probably going to reach a sellout capacity. But here's the thing. There is a chance for some waiting list stuff. We may be able to open up a few more spots, what will end up being the final spots for our DawgNation Duck Hunt tailgate. But if you want to be able to get those, you got to get on the waiting list now so you can do that. For instance, if you go to DawgNation.com right now and try to buy a couple of tickets, it's going to probably say we don't have those tickets available. But if you get on the waiting list, especially if you're one of the first names on the waiting list, then that gives you sort of that opportunity to get those remaining tickets when we do make them available. There are a couple of like hoops we have to jump through to sort of clear more stuff because this does involve a lot of different, kind of bells and whistles and things like that. So get on that waiting list so you can get those final tickets when they do become available. Because when it opens up, it's just going to be like our folks sort of in-house here. We're just going to go right down the list, one after the other. So in the order you get signed up, that is your chance to get your final opportunity at DawgNation tailgate tickets before they're all gone. So same thing as always. Go to DawgNation.com, get there on that waiting list, and you'll have I would say, still a pretty good chance of being a part of what's going to happen there that day. And you've heard me talk about this before. Got a really cool t-shirt we're going to be giving to all of our folks there. Your food, your beverage, tickets, all of that, a big part of this. Just such a fun experience right there in downtown Atlanta at Home Depot backyard next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I want to give a big thanks to the sponsors who make all this possible because we couldn't do all that we do here on this if it wasn't for a great group of folks who help us take care of really big events like that. Kroger, R.S. Andrews, The Finnish Long Drink, our friends at 7-6 Apparel, and Merriweather and Tharp, they all help make this possible. Going to be a great day there that day. You can get more information at DawgNation.com. But as you're hearing me say this, the time is now. Get on the wait list so that you can get into that final queue for your opportunity to be a part of the DawgNation Duck Hunt tailgate. I'm really, really excited about that. It's just going to be a great day in downtown Atlanta, right there at the Home Depot backyard next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Connor Riley coming up in a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today, and let's talk about a 2025 commit to the Georgia Bulldogs, Jabri Wallace-Coleman. Now, Jeff Sentell had a good story about Wallace Coleman at DawgNation.com. I learned a lot about him in that story because prior to that, I have to admit, I probably did not know very much at all about Jabri Wallace Coleman. I'm kind of reminded of when Tony Parker, who went on to great success with the San Antonio Spurs, when he was just kind of a young point guard coming out of France, and he was drafted by the Spurs in the first round. The draft was on TNT that year, and Ernie Johnson turned to Charles Barkley and after the Spurs had drafted Parker and said, "Hey, Charles, what can you tell us about Tony Parker?" And Charles Barkley said, "I don't know who he is, but if the Spurs are taking him in the first round, he must be pretty good." And that's sort of the feeling I have here about Jabri Wallace-Coleman. I don't really know who he is, but if Georgia's taking a running back for the class of 2025 this early, then he must be pretty good. And if you read the story from Jeff Sentell, you have every indication to believe that he is. I'm kind of reminded of what Kirby Smart said the other day and one of the interviews that he did about kind of what Georgia's looking for from running backs right now. They want to be a factory for NFL backs, and that means, the kind of athletic guys that not only run between the tackles but also catch the football there as well. That if that's the kind of sort of backs that Georgia's trying to cultivate, those are the kinds of names that Georgia's looking to bring in the program, the kind of athletic profile that Georgia's looking to bring into the program. The other thing that is kind of interesting here, and in all seriousness, I would love to know more about this. We're in a day and age right now where it seems like the recruiting process is very back-loaded, right? It's like a lot of the real action for a lot of potential commits, a lot of high-profile recruits, seems to take place very late in their process, right before they make decisions. We've seen guys essentially change their mind pretty quickly. Think about Jalen Rashada, who seemed like he was on his way to Florida, then very quickly pivoted, went to Miami, and other examples you can kind of think of that, where that's kind of gone down as of late. The idea that in this current landscape, Georgia, who only has one 2024 commit right now, is ready to take a 2025. That's just interesting to me. It's not good nor bad. It's just interesting. I'd love to hear more about kind of the process by how all of that played out. And I guess you're also kind of left to wonder about the world in which Jabri Wallace-Coleman will inherit when he finally gets here in 2025. The SEC, we know, is going to look way different by then. There'll be 2 additional members. The Georgia schedule likely looks very different there on all of that. You see the very cool edit there, and the nice look at Sanford Stadium, the word committed there, the cool signature. He says he's 1,000% committed. We've seen recruits as of late saying they're 150% committed. I feel like we got to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube of the percentage in which you're committed. I feel like we got to try to get back to 100% on that as the most committed you can possibly be. But nonetheless, it's still a great thing to be able to see, and a very, very interesting world that we'll all be living in come 2025 if this young man does truly make good on this process and eventually show up here as a part of the University of Georgia. But interesting news for the Dogs yesterday as a part of the class of 2025. So we'll cover that and a lot more now. as we shift gears here, it's a Tuesday. That means Connor Riley, fresh off a little vacation, so he'll be raring to go here. It's our Kroger Fresh Take. Happy to have him and all of you with us here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I want to talk to you, Connor, about a subject I was just addressing, but before that, give me everything you know here about Jabri Wallace-Coleman. How much homework have you done already in the class of 2025?
He's from Philadelphia. The last time Georgia went up and got a running back from Philadelphia, it worked out really well.
Yep.
He is currently just finished his freshman year of high school, and I believe that says a lot about how much we should discuss the idea of him one day ending up in a Georgia uniform. I would point out, this is not the first time that a prospect has done this. Trayon Webb committed to Georgia when he was a freshman, and as it stands right now, he is committed to go play to Florida. So hopefully we don't see a repeat of that this time around with Jabri Wallace-Coleman.
It is funny. I was thinking about the Trayon Webb thing a little bit because, it seems like Trayon Webb's been in our life for 100 years. Like he was committed to Oklahoma for a while, or at least like trending towards Oklahoma, it seems like. Now he's back with Florida. At one point in time, he was kind of flirting with Penn State. The idea that Trayon Webb was once a Georgia commit, you're left to wonder, was he 10 years old when he was committed to Georgia? Because that seems like 100 years ago, and he hasn't even started his senior year of high school as of yet. So I have to admit, I was thinking a little bit about Trayon Webb when the news erupted yesterday involving Jabri Wallace-Coleman.
Yeah, so in bringing up Webb and the twists and turns again, he committed before the pandemic began.
Yeah.
So that shows you how much time has passed and sort of what to note with some of these kids. I was writing about 2024 quarterbacks yesterday and thinking, gosh, this is a long time until these guys really show up on campus and make an impact. And then Jabri Wallace-Coleman just sort of makes us all forget about all that.
So I want to bring you into the discussion I was having to start the show today. I thought Pro Football Focus had an interesting look at 30 breakout guys, and the two names that got mentioned from Georgia are Arian Smith and Dumas-Johnson. Now I want to be kind of clear about my point here. The way in which I would use the word breakout star, if I was selecting names from Georgia, I would probably select different names than Arian or Pop. I would probably select other names. I think that Dumas-Johnson is certainly an important player for Georgia's defense here this year, but the sophomore version of Roquan Smith was not what the junior version became. The second-year version of Nakobe Dean was not what he would be in 2021. So even if JDJ is the next Roquan or Nakobe, the sort of true sophomore version of that's probably a solid starter, not necessarily a superstar as of yet. Arian Smith in short bursts is one of the most exciting players in the Georgia roster, but I think of a pecking order of names, I would assume, kind of ahead of him there at the wide receiver spot. So Pro Football Focus may be a little more bullish on both these guys than I am right now. But the point I was making before you joined us is, if you told me these guys were going to have big years, if Dumas-Johnson does exceed what Nakobe was as a sophomore, what Roquan was as a sophomore, if Arian Smith does sort of skip the line, stay healthy for a full year, and kind of bring that sort of swing for the fences home run mentality into a larger component of the Georgia offense, all of a sudden then, boy, that's a big arrow up for the Georgia team overall, I would say. What do you think about all of that, Connor? The outlook for Arian, the outlook for Pop, and kind of the way they fit into a Georgia team that's trying to kind of come back and be a national championship contender again in 2022.
Yeah, I'll start off by taking a shot at Pro Football Focus. Nobody wants to look at charts when they're talking about football. And so I always take some of their analysis and analysis points with a grain of salt there. And when I hear star, I'm thinking those are all SEC type guys. I don't think either of those guys are going to have all SEC type years. I think they're absolutely nail it on the, Roquan Smith, Nakobe Dean sort of ascension that we've seen guys make, where year one, those guys are sort of bit players. Obviously, Nakobe played a little bit more than I would say both JDJ and Roquan Smith did. But year two, those guys emerged as solid starters. And then year three, they became the best linebacker in college football. I don't think that JDJ is going to make sort of a similar ascension this season to where he goes from, a guy who's played roughly 100, 125 snaps to all of a sudden one of the very best linebackers in all of football. But I do think he can emerge over the course of the season as a solid starter. And if this Georgia defense improves the way we think it does at the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if we see JDJ getting some late in the year all-SEC buzz and entering next season as one of those clear potential first-team all-SEC guys. Not to say, unlike a Broderick Jones-type player who, bided his time, got better as the course of the season went on, finally got a chance to make an impact on the field, and now entering his third year in the program, seems like a guy really poised to have a big year. I mean, as far as Arian Smith, there's never been any doubt about his talent, and I think the fact that Pro Football Focus has singled him out, I think sort of shows that, yeah, when he's been on the field, he's able to make plays, and teams have not been able to match up with him speed-wise. The problem with him is that he has never been able to stay healthy. Now, the fact that he wasn't doing track this offseason, does that help him and get him in better football conditioning shape? Ultimately, we'll see on that. But I am interested in seeing, because Georgia is going, if they're going to score the 42 points per game mark that you and I have sort of circled as, hey, they need to do this year, I do think that Arian Smith is going to need to be a part of that, because his field stretching ability is something that, unless you believe C.J. Smith is going to come in and have a really big year right away, they don't really have that true burner over the top. And so if Arian Smith is able to be that for this Georgia offense, it's much easier to see them racking up the explosive plays needed to get to that 42-point threshold.
This pains me to admit, but like one of the names on this Pro Football Focus list is Dallas Turner, the pass rusher for Alabama. Like that to me, Connor, fits the mold of what I think of when I think of a breakout star. Turner's already very good. I think this season he's likely to be one of the very best players in the country. I don't like giving that much credit to Alabama, but the truth is I think that Dallas Turner, assuming he's healthy, is going to be in for a very big season for the Crimson Tide. So if that's the kind of guy that sort of is my definition of breakout guy, who is the most likely name for UGA, or a couple of most likely names? I have one or two in mind. I'm curious if I really kind of tighten the parameters there, who's the one or two names that pop up for you?
I think I'm going to go Broderick Jones first. I came away really impressed with what he was able to do last season, not just as a pass blocker, but I thought he improved physically in the run game over the course of the year. Another year in the strength and conditioning program at Georgia. He's no doubt about it, left tackle. I think, his ascension and the way he played and practiced this offseason did play a little bit in the part of Amarius Smith electing to enter the transfer portal. And so I do think from an offensive side of the ball, it's not necessarily cool to talk about your left tackle that way. I do think Broderick Jones has that sort of ceiling. On the defensive side of the ball, in terms of like reinventing his game and becoming like exponentially becoming a better player, I don't know if he's going to be this. But I think Chris Smith is a guy who he's made big plays in big games before. And I just wonder with, Lewis Dean now gone, some of the other names gone on the defensive side of the ball, if maybe a few more people pick up on what he is doing and how he is impacting this Georgia defense, and that sort of enables him to get to the star man, because he's already a very good player. But, I don't believe he has necessarily athletic traits to make like massive exponential jump. But he's a guy who, with some of the faces not back on this Georgia defense, I think can really make a big step forward and become a more nationally known name by the end of the season.
So Broderick Jones, who you mentioned, that would have been my sort of one or two top names there as well. I think Chris Smith is certainly an interesting name there. But I want to talk about a different defensive guy. Like, what about Nolan Smith? Now, for Nolan to be a breakout guy, there's a couple of things that have to be true. A, he would have to have a great season this year, and B, you'd have to say that he wasn't necessarily among the ranks of great players a year ago. And I don't know where you fall on either side of that. I think that Nolan was clearly a very important player for Georgia last year, but the guys that were drafted this past season, I think would probably all kind of rate ahead of him in terms of maybe their importance for UGA. So I think because of that, I think he's a candidate to be a breakout player. But do you think that Nolan this year can be great player for UGA, one of the best players in the country? Is that the kind of ceiling that he has where, and this is going to sound blasphemous to some, like where he might be mentioned in the same sentence as Will Anderson or somebody like that? Do you think that kind of possibility even exists for Nolan? Because I have to say, I think it's at least a possibility.
Yeah, so I believe that Nolan Smith was great in his role last season in terms of what they asked him to do and how they asked him to play. I think, in my belief, the thing that maybe holds Nolan back from, that Will Anderson type stratosphere, I need to see that Georgia is willing to use him the same way that Alabama uses Will Anderson. They asked Nolan Smith, in my opinion, to do a lot more than Will Anderson does, dropping in coverage, setting the edge, sort of keeping contained, as opposed to just truly letting Nolan Smith pin his ear back and go get the quarterback. And so if you told me that Nolan Smith is going to be allowed to do that and allowed to play that way in this new look defense co-coordinated by Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp, I could certainly see that being the case. Until I do, though, I'm going to be skeptical of that. Now, we have, always sort of seen the inside linebackers be the premier playmakers on this defense. Under Kirby Smart, I wonder with all the newness there and the inexperience, and the fact that Georgia, I think, is stronger on the edge to start the season with Smith and Beal, maybe they tweak that a little bit. But to sort of half answer your question, I do think there's a world in where Nolan Smith could be, a 10-sack guy, and no doubt about it, star. I just don't know if the Georgia defense is going to play him in such a manner where he is able to rack up those stats over the course of the season.
Let's talk quarterbacks for a minute. You had an interesting piece at DawgNation.com today, and obviously it's been an interesting cycle for quarterbacks in that Georgia went after Arch Manning, didn't get him, and now it looks like it may not sign a 2023. Alabama also went after Arch Manning, didn't get him either, and their response that's to potentially sign two quarterbacks. They got Dylan Lonergan out of Brookwood High School yesterday. Obviously, Eli Holstein out of Louisiana has been in the fold here for quite some time. And in your story, you kind of highlight that there's an even greater spotlight now on what Georgia does have, the likes of Gunnar Stockton and Brock Vandegrift and Carson Beck. What do you make of what's currently going on for Georgia at that position and how well it might be set up for the future?
Yeah, so Kirby Smart recently in an interview said he likes where this quarterback room is at in terms of depth and ability, and I certainly think there's some validity to that. But as college football has shown us this offseason, change can impact this. Change can hit you really quickly and change the outlook. We know Stetson Bennett is going to exhaust his eligibility after this year, and I don't know what the appetite is for, say, a Carson Beck or Brock Vandegrift to sit around another year and ride the bench when they're probably at some point going to have options, transfer and play elsewhere. And so you're looking at a world where if you don't sign a 2023 quarterback, you may only have two scholarship guys on your roster in terms of, the guy you presume is going to be the starter between the winner of the Beck and Vandegrift battle, and then Gunnar Stockton. Now Georgia can obviously go out and get a transfer quarterback, but, if you're doing that, are you doing that to bring him in as a backup behind, say, Beck or a Vandegrift? Or are you going out and getting a transfer quarterback to come in and be your starter? So there's just a lot of uncertainty in terms of, I think, a year from now forecasting what this room will look like because, I think that 2019 season, where Georgia only had two scholarship quarterbacks and Jake Fromm and Stetson Bennett because Juwan Mathis was away from the team after having a brain surgery. I think that illuminated a lot in Kirby Smart of not wanting to go through a situation similar like that again because they limited a little bit in terms of what Jake Fromm is able to do that year. And because, you even saw in the SEC championship game against LSU, he gets hurt and you have a totally unproven Stetson Bennett coming in there and you have no other option. So I don't think Kirby Smart would like the idea of having only two scholarship quarterbacks on his roster next season. And so he's going to want to make sure that whether it is a guy that they flip to the 2023 recruiting cycle or a guy they go out and get transfer portal, they're going to want to have more established depth than I think they're looking at this point a year from now.
Listen, there's a strategy involved in recruiting, and any kind of decision involves some level of risk. Georgia clearly put all of its eggs in the Arch Manning basket, and the flip side of that is it was going to have a very hard time making up ground if it didn't get the Manning commitment, which ultimately what happened. And all of a sudden now you see Georgia not really involved really with anybody. I mean, Austin Novosad was the rumor, for a while, the Baylor quarterback commit. It seems like there's a very good chance that he flips away from Baylor, but you don't really see Georgia involved in that really at all. Do you think that Georgia made a mistake in, unlike Alabama, not really having another quarterback in this cycle beyond Arch Manning to turn to?
I think it's going to be too early to say it's a mistake, but this is sort of the price you pay when you want to swim in those deep waters and go toe-to-toe for this kind of a player, and you're committed to waiting out and waiting in the end of the line, and he doesn't end up picking you. And this is, there are countless recruiting examples over the years. You think back, the 2019 class where Georgia, or 2020 rather, they go early on MJ Sherman, they get him, but then later on Will Anderson develops and comes along, and Will Anderson, I think we all can agree right now, is a better player than MJ Sherman is. And that's not to detract from Sherman. Obviously overcoming an injury, he's playing in a stacked outside linebacker room. But, that's just sort of the reality of if you want to recruit at the big boy level, you're going to have to go to those knock them down, drag them out recruiting battles, and sometimes you're going to lose those. And because you were so publicly, fighting for that guy, it just makes it hard to overcome. And at a position like quarterback, it's not like, say, a wide receiver or inside linebacker where you're able to recruit multiple guys in a cycle. I think quarterbacks take notice of, are you really committed to me being the guy? And when Arch Manning is that theoretical guy, I get why Georgia went out and recruited the quarterback position the way they did in the cycle, especially with the fact that they have Gunnar Stockton, a guy who I think is going to be around Georgia for the long haul ahead of him. But this is sort of the downside of it. Now you really have to go out and hit a home run, I think, in the 2024 quarterback recruiting cycle to really make up for the fact that you don't have your first, second, maybe even a third type option in this 2023 quarterback cycle.
I want to ask you another question about recruiting to close things out here. But first, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here today on the program. Of course, Kroger, always a lot of great stuff when it comes to the fun we're having this summer. For a lot of folks, that means being outside and grilling as much as possible. There's nothing in the summertime that tastes better than some fresh food coming right there off the grill. Well, Kroger, you can turn up the heat with all kinds of flavor options there, whether it be the food that you're cooking, the grill that you're using, the patio furniture that you're sitting on. They've got you covered for all of your outdoor entertainment needs. You can find out more about that by stopping by and shopping in store or checking out Kroger.com/grilling today. That's Kroger.com/grilling. Connor, to finish things out here, you and I had a great conversation on Sunday on air as it relates to Raylan Wilson, the terrific linebacker commit that Georgia brings in. And the more I think about that, the more everything that I think we said there that day just is more amplified for me. Another big win for Glenn Schumann. Another example of Georgia staying strong at what's been a great strength. That's that linebacker spot. But maybe more important than anything for me is in a time in which we're all trying to make sense of how weird the recruiting landscape looks. We see programs like Louisville winning recruiting battles they wouldn't have won in the past. We see all kinds of weird things happening, yet a commitment of a guy like Raylan Wilson, at least from a Georgia fan's perspective, does give you reason to believe that things haven't changed that much. NIL may make all things way, way different, but Georgia's still out there winning big-time recruiting battles and doing them in a manner that we've been used to seeing that happen in the past. That the Raylan Wilson news for me is probably a security blanket as much as it is anything.
Yeah, I think an important thing to remember about NIL is, we are now officially in the second year of this being a thing and of this factoring into recruitment. And, I think as NIL sort of develops and becomes a bigger thing and prospects get a better idea of, okay, what are these actually going to look like? Because I think right now, and you and I have discussed this ad nauseum, they see the dollar signs, but, how much of that is actually achievable, attainable? How much of that are they actually getting? I think as NIL sort of unspools itself and we see what it is like more year in, year out, we're going to get a better understanding of this. And the way I would say that a Georgia recruits, an Alabama recruits, an Ohio State recruits, the way those programs have recruited on a year in, year out basis, I think is going to withstand the test of time and withstand the test of NIL. Because you've seen some of these programs. I'll even give Texas A&M as an example right now. Do you know how many commits Texas A&M has at this moment, BA?
I do not.
5.
Oh, my gosh.
Very strange.
Yeah.
Strange. Very, very strange. And you wonder, and this is more speculating, do they blow all their NIL money on the previous class and they have to sort of wait and see what kind of returns they get on that to spin it around? Obviously Miami has a lot of recruiting momentum right now, and we believe that a lot of that is tied to NIL. Tennessee, I think you could say the same thing with their NIL program under Josh Heupel. It's easy to sell NIL, especially in these situations, certainly Miami, Tennessee, Louisville, where you can pitch sort of a newness to it. But if the results on the field don't continue to match up like Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State have in recent seasons, I wonder if that NIL pitch still has the same sort of allure that it might elsewhere. Because we know, Georgia has a very strong NIL program. We also know Kirby Smart doesn't love throwing that money out to guys who haven't really proven it yet. And so I think the big thing going forward with NIL is as we get a better idea and an understanding of this, is this just really sort of a 1, 2, 3 year blip of guys really chasing the money because it's just newness and it's thrown out there, and we don't really know how it's all going to play and pay out, so to speak? Or are we going to see, there are going to be certain programs that rise and fall over the course of the recruiting rankings, but the programs like, say, in Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, they're always still going to be in that, say, top 8 range of they're going to recruit players, they're going to win the battles that they want to win, and stock their rosters with elite talent on a year in, year out basis.
Yeah, it should be a very interesting thing to see, Connor. Really insightful thoughts from you. We appreciate you being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com, and then having you back here on the show again very soon there as well.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Certainly interesting thoughts from Connor Riley. We appreciate him as always being with us, and we certainly appreciate you there as well. And we appreciate our friends at Royal Caribbean helping us cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I was having a conversation yesterday about the fact that Wonder of the Seas, the largest cruise ship in the world, is on its way to Port Canaveral at the end of this year. Sailing's obviously starting there for 2023, and I'm excited about seeing it. In fact, I'm going to try to see if I can sneak down and get a chance to see that very, very early, because there are a lot of experiences on board Wonder of the Seas that are a little bit different than the Royal Caribbean cruise ships I've been on in the past. There are new restaurant concepts and new entertainment options, a little bit of a redesign that makes the ship different even than the other Oasis class ships, which is probably the most similar to. This is one of those ships that just has a little bit different kind of bell and whistle to it, and I want to see it. And so I was trying to find out yesterday if I could get a chance to get down there and maybe see it a little bit here so I can tell you all about how cool it's going to be, because that's how excited I am to have that on our agenda for the upcoming year. And listen, you ought to be doing the same thing, looking at all the options available to you for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, because it's kind of like that one-stop shop for me in terms of all that you need to do. You know, when it comes to like your entertainment, your food, your beverage, visiting places, all those different types of things lead to a million different decisions on kind of a different kind of vacation. When it comes to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, that's basically all kind of laid out there for you. All those options right there at your fingertips, and you can just kind of be busy enjoying it all as opposed to spending time kind of planning it all. And our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can help you out with that there as well, because, listen, they know the ins and outs of Royal Caribbean, and they can kind of hear your situation and talk to you about the option that suits you best. So check them out online at tcava.com. That's tcava.com, or give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. They can talk to you about a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation opportunity here this summer, heading towards the fall or early 2023. Whenever you want to be doing it, Royal Caribbean's ready for you, and it is a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to my own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. All right, so we got a lot to get to here. SEC Through, cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Matt Hayes had an interesting piece at Saturday Down South. Our buddy Michael Carvell wrote about this on DawgNation.com yesterday. So Hayes, in speaking kind of anonymously with some key SEC decision makers, the story includes quotes here. They say they are content to sit at 16 right now. And we talked about this, I believe, yesterday. The predicted race to expand further on the part of the SEC and the part of the Big Ten, for now, that seems very much on hold. Now, the big key decision maker in all of this is obviously Notre Dame. That's the next big fish here, big national following, revenue opportunities go along with that. Notre Dame is the next entity here to make a big decision. And I believe Notre Dame's TV contract with NBC, I think it concludes in 2025. Please don't quote me on that, but it's not a million years from now. It's sometime in the next couple of years. And obviously Notre Dame, if it can, continue to make big money as an independent and not be blocked out of the college football playoff discussion, then remaining an independent, maybe something that Notre Dame would like to do. It's clearly been an independent for a long time and maintain a lot of pride in that. And if Notre Dame's not moving, then there may not be a whole lot of motivation for either the SEC or the Big Ten to do much moving either. Obviously, keep in mind here, and I know people kind of gloss over when you start talking about TV contracts, things like that, but one of the other big issues is that the ACC, what you call your grant of rights agreement, it's basically your media rights deal. It's a long-range contract, many, many years left on that, and it is a very onerous thing, at least based on the way the contract is written, so we've been told, for the current ACC teams to get out of that. So, as a response to USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, it's not obvious the SEC could go raid the ACC, nor is it all that obvious that the Notre Dame or the SEC would have much interest in each other. I mean, clearly the money makes sense, but Notre Dame culturally is a little bit of a weird fit for the SEC, so it's not obvious what kind of marriage that would end up being anyway. So maybe one of the things motivating the SEC not to seek more expansion, has been reported by Matt Hayes here, is the idea that there just really isn't a good option available. The ACC teams are bound by contract. The Notre Dame situation maybe it's a little bit too weird anyway. If Notre Dame joins a conference, it's likely to be the Big Ten for maybe a million different reasons. Now, the other thing that comes out here is the idea that some of the SEC folks are saying, and clearly this is probably just lip service, it probably doesn't mean anything, but they are still nonetheless saying it. It sounds like for now they are paying lip service to the idea that they don't want to raid the rest of college football, and they don't want to put the rest of college football out of business. Because here's the thing, that if the Big Ten wanted to further expand, if it wanted to bring in Oregon, if it wanted to bring in Washington, clearly it could. And if you're looking at those Pac-12 teams that might have some value to the Big Ten or any league, the Seattle-based University of Washington, Oregon, because of its connection to Nike, the fact that it's been, in the kind of the championship picture in the past, those are teams that might have some value. Maybe Stanford would there as well, but those two teams at least would have some value. But apparently the Big Ten doesn't want to do it. We were being told that Phil Knight, the big founder of Nike, the big money guy there, reached out to leagues and kind of got rebuffed there. So as of now, the Big Ten doesn't want to put these other leagues out of business. Because this, if you've ever played poker, you play Monopoly with somebody, that when somebody else has more money than you, they can kind of bully you around. That's true. You're moving your little thimble around the Monopoly board. It's true if you're playing Texas Hold'em. It's true in a lot of areas that the person with the bigger stack just has a better chance of winning. Well, right now, because of the media deals that the SEC already has, the Big Ten's about to have, they're just going to have more money than everybody else. They wanted to leverage that money to kind of drive a larger chasm between themselves and the other leagues and essentially poach the remaining teams that have any value whatsoever. They could do that and essentially render about half of the Pac-12, Big 12, and ACC is a little more than like group of 5 teams. If they wanted to do that, they could. Right now, the SEC, according to Matt Hayes, says we don't want to do that. And we'll see how long that remains to be true. I sort of hope it is done. I mean, listen, I'm an SEC homer in a lot of ways, but I don't necessarily want the Big 12 to go away. I don't necessarily want the Pac-12 to go away. I kind of like the idea of college football being a national sport. I kind of like the idea of college athletics mattering, at least in some form or fashion, across the entire country. So, if the poaching of USC and the poaching of UCLA and the earlier poaching by the SEC of, Oklahoma and Texas, if this is the end of it, then maybe in some form or fashion, something that closely resembles what college football has been, maybe it still can survive. So that's the reporting as of now. Clearly, a lot of these, sort of phrases could be easily forgotten if a new opportunity presents itself. But maybe for now, this is going to kind of quiet down and be done, at least for the moment. Let me run through a couple of recruiting notes here. Dylan Lonergan, we talked about this with Connor a moment ago. Lonergan, good-looking quarterback from Brookwood High School, commits to Alabama yesterday. That gives Alabama 2 of the top 10 quarterbacks of the class of 2023. There's a little bit of extenuating circumstances here in the fact that Lonergan is a big-time baseball player. You see him there even showing off a little bit of baseball on both sides of the football commitment edit here. So this is a guy who clearly has baseball right now as a big part of his future. That's going to be a turnoff for some programs. A lot of programs only want their quarterback thinking about football. Alabama has the luxury of letting him think about both because he's not even the only quarterback in this signing class, the other being Eli Holstein. So this gives Alabama luxury to, kind of let him explore himself here for a little bit as he starts his college career. It's fair to point out Alabama has had success with multiple quarterback classes in the past. Think about 2017. Obviously, Tua Tagovailoa got the most attention at the time. But eventually it's Mac Jones, the other signee in that 17 class, who actually maybe goes on to be the more decorated of the two guys. So, we've seen Alabama have success with multiple quarterbacks before. I guess the snarky version of me kind of wonders out loud. A lot of Alabama fans have told you, Eli Holstein, that's the other quarterback commit, young man also out of Louisiana. We thought he was better than Arch Manning. That's why Alabama took him before Arch Manning made his decision. If you really thought that was so true, would you be taking a second quarterback in this class? I don't know that you would. So in some respects, maybe this kind of caused you to rethink Eli Holstein maybe a little bit. But nonetheless, Alabama adding another quarterback for the class of 2023. Louisville has been very hot on the recruiting trail as of late, more hot than used to seeing them be. Yesterday, adding a 4-star offensive lineman from the state of Georgia, Madden Sanker, who's going up to Louisville right now. So on this, you kind of think a couple of things here. On the one hand, it's a Louisville team, already got a Reuben Owens and had some big recruiting wins. You clearly see NIL seemingly being a factor there at Louisville because these are the kinds of recruiting victories they were never claiming prior to the NIL age. And I think some of the reason why we talked the other day about Kentucky, Mark Stoops kind of erupting here and saying that Kentucky's got to change its NIL ways. I think part of that's driven by the fact they just see Louisville right now, far more aggressive, the in-state rival, than the Wildcats have chosen to be. But the other thing here is another example of kind of a high-profile offensive lineman that we might would have talked about with at least some connection to Georgia going somewhere else. I don't know that anybody expected Sanker yesterday to go to a UGA, but it's the kind of in-state offensive line prospect that kind of leads you to kind of circle back to a topic we addressed on Friday's show, which is what is the current state of Georgia's offensive line recruiting. We saw, a big 4-star from Denmark go to Tennessee. Here's Sanker going to Louisville. It puts a bigger spotlight on some of those other decisions that are still yet to be made, whether it be holding on to Bo Hughley, which I think is very, very important. I would expect Georgia to probably be able to do, but eventually winning with a guy like Monroe Freeling out of the state of South Carolina that seems to be down to maybe Georgia and Miami. There are clearly some big offensive line battles to be waged that are going to be determined how Georgia fans feel about the offensive line component of the 2023 recruiting class. One more note to give you, and this involves the 2024. Joseph Stone, given name, really impressive 2024 athlete from Grayson High School. Probably one of the best 2024s that I saw a year ago in terms of just his overall athletic profile. Actually started at quarterback for a while for Grayson. He made a pledge to LSU yesterday, so another example of a Grayson guy going somewhere else other than UGA, which is probably fine, I guess. But I do think he's a pretty impressive athlete. I'm not exactly sure what he'll do at the college level from a position standpoint, but he is a really good athlete. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So a pretty big pickup for LSU, who's also been pretty hot in recruiting as of late for the 2024 class. That being JoJo Stone on his way to the Tigers, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me also talk to some of you here for a moment who are obviously on the forefront of having to make a decision, either you as a young student or you're maybe a parent of a young student. You got college coming up and trying to find a way to get all that college tuition covered and paid for. All of a sudden, it's got crunch time to sort of figure out how exactly that's going to be going down. How are you going to get that full cost of tuition paid for? Well, if you need last-minute help on that, that's where my friends at College Ave can step in and do some great things to you, because they got some private student loan options available that can help you cover the full cost of college. If that's a concern for you, that's where College Ave can step in and take some of the stress away for you on all this. It's a private student loan that can fit your budget, help you, just get this paid for, right? Because when it comes to starting that college career and knowing there's excess expense related to that, the opportunity to breathe a little easier, know that's taken care of, that's what College Ave can provide for you. They got competitive interest rate, a flexible repayment plan, great customer service. It only takes about 3 minutes to kind of sign up via the application, so that's a cool thing there as well. If you go to the website collegeave.com, that's AVE, collegeave.com, you can find out more about that. collegeave.com. Time to get those last-minute college tuition bills paid for, the full cost covered, a private student loan from our friends at College Ave, a great way to do that. So check them out online at collegeave.com. A couple of golden shoes to say goodbye to you here today. Let's show you the first one on the screen here for a moment. How about this from the great Fran Tarkenton? You talk about an enviable life. Tarkenton yesterday, of course, great former Georgia quarterback and record setter in the NFL, Pro Football Hall of Famer, says, how about this? Tarkenton says, today I got a hole-in-one on the number 5 green at Pebble Beach. That makes a total of 5 holes in one, and credit to him for the correct grammar on that, so far in my lifetime between Augusta National and Pebble Beach. Can you believe that? To even play those courses that many times, but also get 5 aces while playing them. He says, I shot 75 for the day, which is 7 years better than an 82-year-old man is supposed to play. I'm on a roll. Truly indeed, the great Francis Tarkenton is on a roll there, and very cool to see him sharing that on social media. Another golden shoe goes the way of someone, Mike McPherson, who says, I just got 4 tickets to the DawgNation Duck Hunt Tailgate. Can't wait to get this season started off right. Mike, we're glad you're going to be there and excited to see all of you as a part of that while tickets are still available. And I know we're waitlist on that now, but you go to DawgNation.com, get your waitlist opportunity, and maybe you can join us there for that too, the way that Mike is there too. We will give him a golden shoe for shouting us out there on that. We'll also remind you, lousy, stinking Gators, about 4,933 days since Florida has won a national championship. And our Gator History Countdown, 109 days from now, Dogs back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. That is our Gator Hitter Countdown. We will see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews will do for you today. We'll take some of your comments. As per usual on a Tuesday, we're not going to be able to go super long on that just because Tuesday generally presents us with a good bit of stuff going on around here. But we'll take your comments and have fun while we do. So let us do that right now. And hope you're all doing great and having a good day, and love your thoughts on the show or anything else related to UGA right now. We'll do all of that with you here. All right, let's see if I can get in here. There you go. Boom. YouTube comments. Howard Eubanks checking in. Howard, great to see you. Jay Shipes reminding us that Ryan Day hasn't won anything, and that's a fair point. We think that Day's a pretty sharp coach. We also think that Day probably gets a little extra love because he kind of has the stubble beard look that sort of fits a lot of what the NFL guys can look like right now. Ryan Day is clearly someone that looks the part, but they're going to have to be better defensively here this year, no doubt about that. Real Boss says people so caught up on what Georgia lost but forgot we recruit big-time defensive guys. We've got more 4- and 5-star players. I think Real Boss is right about that. I think overall it has been greatly overstated what Georgia lost off last year's team. Yeah, they had, most draft picks, whatever else. But the honest truth is, most national champions have had a similar number of draft picks, all the way around in recent years. And so Georgia's not in that different a situation than a lot of other teams are necessarily. So I think for the most part, there are a lot of people who are sort of hopeful that Georgia takes a big step back from a talent standpoint. But I don't think that Georgia's going to do them any favors there in that regard. Zebulon Owen says Scully deserves a golden shoe for being a delusional Gator fan. Yeah, there you go. I guess he was in here stirring things up a moment ago. Jerry Dogfan also says that Scully Gator is Scully Reddy's Nature Gator. So I see Nature Gator on Twitter sometimes. Does he still comment here in the comment section? He still stirs things up on Twitter every now and then. But I don't see him in the comment section quite as much. But maybe it's the same person. Elite GB also kind of reminding that in 2020 when Georgia did lose to Florida, how much had to go wrong for that to take place. Yeah. I mean, at one point in time, and listen, you sound like an Alabama fan if you say this, but at one point in time, Georgia's up 14-0 and coasting pretty good until a good number of setbacks occurred, and that is certainly true. And like Florida's a little bit like the Dodgers, LeBron James. Like you sort of know the level of sports argument you're trying to win or the hollow level of your accomplishment. If your big claim to fame is like a pandemic type thing, like LeBron's pandemic title played in an empty gym, that just doesn't count. Not to the same level other stuff does. Certainly the Dodgers winning a pandemic World Series, short season, different kind of playoff, it just doesn't count. Yeah, Florida won the East in 2020, but good luck getting anybody to believe that your pandemic empty stadium season meant the same thing as what Georgia has done in any of the years before that prior to it. Here's how you know it was a weird year. Georgia didn't win the East. That's something that Georgia always does. The fact that Georgia didn't win the East that year is the only proof that you need that it was a weird pandemic-style season. And if I was wrong on that, then Florida would have done something to prove me wrong last season, but they didn't. They laid down like chumps. Brandon Griffin says, is Monken's system more complex than other programs? It sure seems like it. Perhaps this is why it takes a couple of seasons for our young quarterbacks like Beck to be ready. Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know. I mean, I think that good teachers, even in complicated systems, are going to, simplify it so it can be understood. I also don't necessarily think that any of the Georgia quarterbacks currently on the roster are like behind schedule. I don't. I mean, like, was Mac Jones, who is the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, was he farther behind Carson Beck going into his third year at Alabama? His third year at Alabama would have been 2019. Was he behind at that point in time or ahead at that point in time where Carson Beck is right now? I don't necessarily think that he was. I mean, I think that there is a conversation around quarterbacks involving Georgia fans that's sort of more accelerated than it needs to be. I think that Beck had a tremendous disservice done to him. He had his first year on campus taken away by the pandemic. He was here, but it wasn't spring practice. It wasn't football like normal. And there's no telling how, growth and development could have been hampered by the fact that the meeting opportunity wasn't the same as it would have been. So, that's a little bit of an extenuating circumstance there. But if Carson Beck goes on to be a great quarterback in, like, say, year 4 of his college career, something like that, I mean, he's not going to be all that different than a lot of guys who've kind of done the same kind of thing. The doubts that people have about Stetson Bennett, either fairly or not, accelerate the conversation about other Georgia quarterbacks. And I sort of get that, but putting aside whatever you think about Bennett, the other guys aren't necessarily behind schedule in terms of being what they have a chance to be. Now, if you're going to say, well, why weren't they great right from the start? Maybe there's an example of that from time to time of a true freshman who just plays great right away. They may not be that caliber of prospect, but that caliber of prospect's actually pretty rare. What's a little bit more common among the category of great quarterbacks are guys who grow into eventually being that, and it does just sort of take time. And so I don't know that this has got anything to do with the Monken system being complicated as much as it does with college football. It's just really hard. It's just really hard. And it just sort of takes a little while to be ready. When Kirby first got here in 2016, 2017, Georgia did lean on freshman quarterbacks, and they kind of played okay. Jacob Eason was really no better than okay his first season. Jake Fromm had a historic year in 2017, but statistically speaking, it was a pretty meager year in terms of the stat line. When eventually guys do play, you actually hope they exceed what your true freshman did for you in 16 and 17. And the fact that you don't have to desperately rely on some incoming freshman to come in and save you, I do think speaks to the program growth that Georgia has enjoyed. Kent Holcomb says, I'm a duck hunter and raised golden retrievers for 20 years, and a hunter with the best dog always eats the most. Let the big dog eat. Ken, I like that. That is really good stuff. Really good stuff. James Hightower says, if Carson Beck wins the quarterback job, the Gunner and Brock crowd, their heads are going to explode. Yeah, I sort of get the impression that for whatever reason, from a popularity standpoint, I think Carson may have the popularity lead right now. And I don't know if I'm just misreading that. It may be closer than I'm even giving it credit for, but I sort of get the impression that Carson's got more folks rooting for him. That may just be because he's a little older and maybe folks feel like they've seen a little bit more with him. Philip Jordan Wells says the coveted fishing with Orlando Wilson lead-in audience is what kept Vanderbilt in the SEC. So I remember that when he was the one that always had the Braves hat on, right? And it would be like Saturday evening, right before Jim Crockett Wrestling would come on. That really cool fishing with Orlando Wilson, the old school Braves hat. I remember that very well. Sandy Price says the fact that Kirby's not used the transfer portal so far, and that's being overlooked, and speaks volumes about just how good the Dogs are going to be this year. Sandy could be right about that. Clearly, Georgia felt comfortable standing pat. Maybe it didn't quite see what it was looking for either, but they felt pretty comfortable with that. Miriam Corbin says dropping Vanderbilt from the conference and Tech from the schedule would make games more exciting and would certainly bring more revenue. No other teams would bring that kind of excitement. I think that's an interesting point, Miriam. I think as college ball continues to change, I do think there's a possibility that Georgia doesn't play Georgia Tech one day. I just think it's a very big possibility. I do. And as far as like the contraction from the SEC, I find it interesting that nobody brings this up ever. This is never talked about as a possibility. But at a certain point, that's your best way to make more money, right? Because eventually there just aren't, it's not obvious right now that Oregon, Washington, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, these teams that you could, even conceive of the SEC considering, it's not obvious that there are any of them enough of a value add to make financial sense. Notre Dame clearly would be. Other than that, there are a few others that might be, but you'd have to be smarter than me to know if that truly is a team that brings more into the relationship they would take from it. So it's just not clear to me the SEC would ever truly want to expand unless it felt like it had to be at 20 teams to sort of match the number of teams in the Big Ten for whatever reason. But there's not an obvious take left on the board for any conference beyond Notre Dame. There's a few maybes out there. So if you don't have an obvious team that you could add to make things bigger and better, then at a certain point, don't you start looking at the teams that are in the league and occupying a full spot of the, full piece of the pie that may not bring much to the table? And for a long time, Vanderbilt was very safe within the SEC because of its academic prestige. But the honest truth is we could be heading for a time in the future, and this is me speaking out loud and just sort of thinking out loud, but we could be heading in for a time in the future where, the notion that the players are student athletes, that charade may be just given up completely. And so if the notion that the players are still students, if that is kind of pushed aside and basically, kind of laughed off, at that point in time, what value does a fancy pants academic school like Vanderbilt bring to the table if we no longer care about academics at all when it comes to what we think of as college football? And I don't know. No one's really talking about that now. But at a certain point, conferences getting smaller while also maintaining the same media rights deal, that may be the next way to make more money. But as I said, right now, people aren't really discussing that. At DawgNation.com here for a quick moment. Cam Hasty says the days are coming where Georgia Tech will be bigger rivals with Georgia State than UGA. I mean, I know that sounds like, Georgia fan kind of poking at Tech, but if you're Tech, you do have to be really careful here. I think you do. I mean, right now, the fact that no one seems to want to challenge the ACC media rights contract for a school like Tech and others, that might be a really good thing. Because let's say that the Big Ten said, oh my gosh, we want to get to 20. We want to take, Seattle, that's what University of Washington's located. We want to take Oregon. They've been to a playoff before. They played for a BCS title in 2010. They got Nike. We want to take them. And you know what? We're going to take Stanford and Cal for the same reason we took UCLA and USC, because they at least have some connection to that sort of big Bay Area region. We're going to take Stanford, Cal, Oregon, and Washington. Well, at that point in time, maybe the SEC says, okay, we do need to find some other team somewhere so we can be somewhat similar in size to the Big Ten. At that point in time, then maybe you're looking to kind of sort of void this ACC media contract. There's been some chatter out there that if enough teams wanted to do so, they could actually just disband the ACC all the way around. And if you're adding teams out of the ACC, I don't think Tech would be one of them joining the SEC. And so you're left to say, for a school like that, what does happen to you? I mean, I don't like Tech, but, I don't like the idea of teams at that kind of level being just sort of completely destroyed. So I guess in a way, I'm kind of glad that this expansion stuff's maybe going to stop for now. At least that's the lip service to this until Notre Dame decides what it wants to do. Because while I don't really wish any good things for Tech necessarily, the idea that you would destroy the future of a lot of programs at kind of that same level, I just sort of prefer that not taking place. Matt Rugavina says Vanderbilt does bring one thing to the table. That's the Nashville TV market. That's what's pushing all this expansion anyway. I think it's important to note this. And actually, let me put a pin on that because I got to go for now. And we'll pick that conversation up tomorrow. I'm sorry, I'm up against a deadline on something, so I got to say goodbye to you for now. Check out the AJC online, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Braves big series continues against the Mets. Falcons training camp preview of that. Hawks in Vegas for the Summer League. A lot going on there in the world of sports. AJC's got it all for you. AJC.com. And check that out. Also, R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews for all of that today. We'll keep the conversation going tomorrow. Got to go for now. We'll see you then. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.